Welcome back to Notes of Curiosity, exploring ideas that matter. I'm Alex.
I'm Eve.
Today we're going back in time to pre-World War I Europe, a world Stefan Zweig called a golden age of security. Imagine, a life where empires felt eternal gold was, like money, and the future was predictable. This is the world Zweig brings to life in his autobiography, The World of Yesterday.
What's so striking about Zweig's account is how he really captures this feeling of stability everywhere.
Right.
He says everything in our almost 1,000-year-old Austrian monarchy seemed based on permanence.
Yeah.
And even the poorest people in Vienna had this natural appreciation for beauty.
Right.
Just fostered by the city's incredible art and culture.
It's like we're stepping into a time capsule, and our guide is Zweig himself.
Right.
He's born in 1881, so he lived through this seemingly unshakable world,
Yeah.
only to see it all fall apart as Europe went to war.
Exactly. The world of yesterday isn't just his story. It's a reflection on an entire era told by someone who was right there, between the intellectual elite and the changing tides of society.
Okay, so let's unpack this world of yesterday.
Yeah.
Zweig talks about this security that permeated life back then.
Right.
The Austro-Hungarian Empire, seemed like it would last forever.
Mm-hmm.
The gold-backed kroner gave everyone this financial predictability, and people meticulously planned their futures.
Yeah.
Confident that hardship could be avoided, it was just a different mindset.
It wasn't just a feeling, though. It was reflected in how they lived their lives.
Yeah.
Zweig uses his own family as an example. His father was a textile industrialist who totally embodied this era's approach to wealth, slow and steady growth, reinvesting profits, avoiding speculation, and he eventually became a millionaire by doing that.
Zweig also talks about, how his family gradually adopted conveniences like bigger apartments or the occasional carriage ride.
Yeah.
It really shows us the measured pace of change back then.
And what I find really interesting is that Zweig inherited this aversion to showing off wealth or titles. He actually says, "My father never chased after or accepted any titles or positions, though as a major industrialist, he would have been entitled to them." So this really shaped Zweig's independent spirit and his critical view of social hierarchies.
This sense of security, it wasn't just for the wealthy, though, was it?
Not at all.
Zweig talks about how this feeling extended to all social classes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
He points out that even the working class had access to things like insurance and savings plans.
Right.
Which, really added to that feeling of predictability and stability.
Right.
He says, only those who are confident and carefree about the future can fully enjoy the good life of the present. That really highlights the widespread belief in a secure future.
But amidst all this idyllic stability, Zweig hints at these cracks that were already there.
Yeah.
He contrasts the security of his childhood with the rigidity of the education system.
This is where we see a really fascinating tension emerge. Zweig describes this dreary school environment with dilapidated buildings, uncomfortable furniture, and this oppressive sense of authority everywhere.
Sounds awful. He writes, "For 8 long years of high school, no teacher ever asked us what knowledge we desired to acquire. No encouragement for curiosity or independent thought."
Yeah, the curriculum was all about rote learning and obedience.
Right.
And Zweig suggests this wasn't just, a reflection of the times. It was a deliberate strategy by the state to maintain control and suppress any potential disruption to their precious stability.
Wow, it really makes you think about how education systems can be a product of their time.
Yeah.
What were the unintended consequences of all this structure?
Well, what's interesting is that despite this oppressive environment, Zweig and his classmates developed this insatiable appetite for art, literature, music. It's this stifling system made them crave something more, a desire to explore beyond their structured little world.
This is where Viennese cafés played such a unique role.
Absolutely. They became these intellectual hubs with newspapers, journals, new ideas flowing in from all over the world.
It's amazing Zweig talks about spending hours in these cafés devouring everything from Nietzsche and Baudelaire to Walter Whitman.
Right.
It's like they were creating their own cultural movement underground, driven by this thirst for knowledge and a desire to push against the status quo.
Yeah, and there's this almost religious reverence for cultural figures in Zweig's writing. He talks about meeting Johannes Brahms as a kid and how even a brief encounter with a servant of a famous actor was like this huge deal to him.
Wow.
It shows the power these figures had to inspire and ignite the imagination of a generation that was, searching for meaning.
And that brings us to Hugo von Hofmannsthal.
Yeah.
This literary prodigy who emerged from this very environment and totally captivated Zweig's generation.
His story is incredible. Like, you have these established writers like Hermann Bahr and Arthur Schnitzler,
Yeah.
and they were just floored to find out that the author of these really sophisticated poems and prose was just a teenager.
Hofmannsthal's talent was obvious even in his early works like Yesterday and The Death of Titian.
Totally. And his success had this profound impact on Zweig's circle.
Right.
It was proof that brilliance could exist even within the confines of their upbringing.
Yeah.
Like Zweig says, Hofmannsthal's success made us happy and proud. It was as if we ourselves had achieved it, for he belonged to us, he sprang from our circle. That shared sense of achievement fueled their own creative ambitions.
So he was like a model for success, someone who broke free from the constraints of their society.
Right.
But Zweig also mentions another inspiring figure, Rainer Maria Rilke, who took a different path to success.
Yeah, Rilke, unlike Hofmannsthal, who was this prodigy, he developed his talent gradually. He reached mastery in his early 20s, which, was reassuring to other aspiring artists.
Right.
It showed that talent could also flourish through dedication and hard work over time.
So we see these two contrasting paths to success, the prodigy and the dedicated craftsman.
Right.
But this artistic revolution wasn't happening in a vacuum, was it?
Not at all. There were these broader social and political shifts happening in Austria at the same time.
Like what?
Well, you had the emergence of the socialist movement and their demand for universal suffrage. This was a direct challenge to the power structure of the wealthy elite.
Zweig describes this anxiety surrounding the first May Day parade in Vienna.
Right.
Where workers marched peacefully, defying expectations of violence.
Yeah, it forced the establishment to acknowledge the growing power of the working class.
A sign that the world of yesterday was facing a new reality.
Definitely. And then you have Karl Lueger, this charismatic leader of the Christian Social Party.
Yeah.
He was really good at exploiting the anxieties of those threatened by industrialization, particularly small business owners and artisans.
Lueger was a complex character, though, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Considered an anti-Semite, but he maintained this veneer of civility in public and private life.
Right. He governed Vienna pretty effectively and didn't implement any discriminatory policies.
It's interesting that Zweig draws a parallel between Lueger's tactics and Hitler's, saying that both of them were really skilled at manipulating the fears and resentments of the lower middle class to gain power.
He writes, Lueger was Hitler's model. It was he who taught Hitler how to misuse the anti-Semitic slogan.
It's a chilling reminder that even small shifts in the social fabric can have massive consequences.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how we can recognize those subtle signs in our own time.
That's the question, isn't it? And that's why the world of yesterday is so relevant today.
Right.
It's not just a nostalgic look back. It's a warning about how fragile seemingly stable worlds can be.
Exactly. As we dig deeper into Zweig's story, we'll see how all these social and political undercurrents come together, leading to the collapse of that world he describes.
Definitely. It's a fascinating journey.
I can't wait to continue it.
One of the things that makes Zweig's account so fascinating is how he weaves his personal experiences into this bigger story of societal change.
Yeah.
We see him grappling with the changing values and anxieties at the time.
Right.
And this tension is especially clear in how he explores sexuality.
You're talking about his descriptions of those clandestine brothels in Vienna, right?
Exactly. Zweig writes about these hidden parts of Viennese society with this mix of fascination and unease. He observed that men from all walks of life would visit these places.
Yeah.
And he sees it as a symptom of this deeper moral shift happening.
It's interesting how he frames it. It's
Yeah.
not just about the act itself, but the hypocrisy and secrecy surrounding it.
Exactly. He says, if the secret history of some of those brothels were ever to be written, it would be a fascinating and also an authentic cultural document of the time, because it was in these very places that the particular secret was hidden, that of the disintegration of morality. He's suggesting that, beneath this surface of respectability, there was this growing moral ambiguity, this loosening of traditional values, and that foreshadowed the upheavals to come.
So we see this tension between the old and the new in different aspects of life.
Yeah.
And that tension comes through in his portrayal of university life as well.
Oh, absolutely. He describes the system so steeped in tradition, where professors held all the authority and students were just expected to conform. He talks about this almost medieval atmosphere at the university, where the professors, clad in their gowns, appeared like the representatives of an ancient and immutable order.
But even within this seemingly rigid environment, Zweig finds pockets of intellectual excitement.
He does. He connects with professors who challenge conventional thinking, who spark his curiosity.
Right.
It's like he's forging his own intellectual path, looking for knowledge and inspiration beyond the official curriculum.
And this pursuit of knowledge takes him beyond Austria's borders.
Yes.
To Paris, a city he describes as this hub of creativity and intellectual energy.
Zweig's description of Paris is so captivating. He jumps headfirst into this vibrant literary and artistic scene. He's going to lectures, visiting museums, meeting writers and thinkers from all over Europe. He says, "I breathed deeply of the air of freedom that streamed toward me from all sides. I plunged head over heels into the intoxicating whirlpool of Parisian life."
It's like Paris represents everything that Vienna wasn't.
Right.
This place where tradition is constantly being challenged, where experimentation is embraced, and where the pursuit of knowledge and beauty is more important than social conventions.
Exactly. And this experience in Paris changes Zweig profoundly.
Yeah.
It broadens his horizons, deepens his commitment to writing, and reinforces his belief in the power of intellectual and artistic exchange across borders.
He comes back to Vienna with this renewed sense of purpose.
Yeah, but his journey isn't without its challenges.
Right.
He talks about getting rejected by publishers, struggling to find his voice as a writer. And his honesty about these struggles is really striking.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from the setbacks and doubts, even as he's striving for success.
I think that makes his story so relatable.
Oh, totally. To anyone who's ever had creative ambitions.
Right. It's a reminder that everyone faces uncertainty, that the path to success is rarely straightforward. But Zweig keeps going. He keeps writing, refining his craft, and ultimately he gets the recognition he was looking for.
And that success lets him travel more widely to connect with other writers and intellectuals. To deepen his understanding of the world outside of Austria, he travels all across Europe, immersing himself in different cultures and encountering all these different perspectives.
This constant exploration seems like it was a core part of who he was.
Yeah.
Always seeking new experiences, new challenges to his assumptions, new insights into the human condition.
But while Zweig's personal world is expanding, the political landscape of Europe is becoming more and more volatile.
Right.
This is where the threat of war really starts to loom large.
He describes the growing tensions between nations, the rise of nationalism, the escalating arms race.
It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. And what's particularly striking is his criticism of the political leaders who were basically leading Europe towards this disaster. He says they were playing with fire, these so-called statesmen, and did not want to see that the fire was real, that it could spread and devour them. He saw them as driven by ego and ambition, blind to the real danger they were creating.
It's heartbreaking to read his account of the start of World War I.
Yeah.
He describes it as the end of an era, this moment that shattered the illusion of peace and progress, that had defined his youth.
He perfectly captures that sense of loss and disillusionment. The world of security was gone. It had been swept away like a cobweb. It's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
It speaks to the profound psychological impact of this global conflict.
He also contrasts that initial wave of enthusiasm for the war, fueled by patriotism, with the grim reality that set in as the conflict dragged on.
He describes the horrors of trench warfare, the senseless loss of life, the psychological toll on everyone involved.
Right.
He calls the war a monstrous machine devouring everything in its path. It's this stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked nationalism and militarism.
And Zweig's own experience during the war adds another layer to this.
Right.
He served in the Austrian army, initially signed to the war archives in Vienna, and he witnessed firsthand this bureaucratic machine that was fueling the conflict.
He describes feeling more and more alienated from the war effort, disgusted by the propaganda and censorship that was everywhere. He writes, "I felt like I was living in a world of lies." So his disillusionment grows, and he eventually resigns from his position and decides to dedicate himself to promoting peace and understanding through his writing.
That says a lot about his character.
It does.
And his commitment to his ideals, even when there is so much pressure to conform.
But the war also had a huge impact on his sense of identity.
Yeah.
As a Jewish Austrian, he found himself caught between two worlds.
Right. This is a crucial point.
It is. He felt connected to his Austrian homeland, but also this growing unease as anti-Semitism became more prevalent after the war.
He says, I felt like a man who is suddenly told that his home is built on quicksand.
It's chilling foreshadowing of what was to come.
Yeah.
And it highlights how complex identity can be in a world torn apart by conflict and prejudice.
So the world that had once felt so secure was crumbling around him, both personally and politically.
It's a stark reminder that even seemingly stable societies can be vulnerable to extremism and division.
Definitely. And as we move into the final part of our deep dive into the world of yesterday, we'll see how these themes of disillusionment and the fragility of civilization become even more prominent as Zweig navigates the turbulent years between the two world wars.
Yeah.
We left off with Zweig, dealing with the aftermath of World War I and this growing sense of unease about the future.
Yeah.
So as we get into the final part of his story, what happens to this world of yesterday that he describes so vividly?
It was gone, completely shattered. He goes back to Austria after the war, but it's a totally different place.
Right.
The Austro-Hungarian Empire has collapsed, and there's all this economic instability and political turmoil.
It's a whole new world.
He writes, we had entered a world of insecurity where nothing seemed permanent, where every value was questioned, where the ground beneath our feet was constantly shifting.
Wow.
It really captures that feeling of disillusionment and anxiety that was everywhere after the war.
And for Zweig, this unease was even stronger because he was Jewish.
Yeah, anti-Semitism was always there, but it became much more open in this climate of fear and uncertainty.
He talks about experiencing casual prejudice, seeing the rise of these right-wing nationalist groups, and just feeling increasingly vulnerable.
He writes, the Jew, even if he did not want to admit it to himself, could not help but feel that he was now living on sufferance.
It's a huge shift from the pre-war era, where assimilation and acceptance had seemed possible.
Yeah.
It's scary how quickly a society's values can change.
Yeah, it is.
How tolerance can just turn into fear and hatred. And Zweig wasn't immune to the allure of these darker forces, was he?
That's one of the most fascinating and disturbing parts of his story. He actually describes feeling drawn to Hitler's speeches.
Right.
Even though he knew how dangerous Hitler's rhetoric was. He says, I felt a strange fascination with this man, even though I knew he was leading us towards disaster.
That's so unsettling. It makes you wonder about that line between curiosity and complicity.
It does.
How do you think Zweig dealt with that internal conflict?
In the end, he rejected those extremist ideologies. But it wasn't easy. As Hitler's power grew, the threat to Zweig's safety and freedom also grew.
Right.
He was eventually forced to flee Austria. He had to leave behind his home, his friends, everything he knew.
That must have been a devastating decision.
It was. To be uprooted from your homeland, forced into exile, it's a loss that goes beyond just the physical place.
It's a loss of identity almost.
Exactly. Zweig captures that pain perfectly. He writes, I had become a stranger in my own land, an exile in a world that no longer understood me.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And then, of course, World War II breaks out, plunging Europe back into chaos.
It's devastating.
How did Zweig react to this second global conflict?
With this deep sense of despair, he watched as the continent descended into barbarity again.
It's like history repeating itself.
He writes, the world of yesterday had been destroyed, and with it all hope for a better future.
It's so heavy.
Yeah.
You can almost feel the weight of history on him. Is that where he leaves us? With this feeling of hopelessness.
Well, the world of yesterday definitely ends on a somber note.
Yeah.
But it's not completely without hope, is why emphasizes the importance of preserving culture,
Right.
remembering the lessons of the past, and never giving up on the fight for a better world. He writes, only the spirit is indestructible.
That's a powerful message, especially for us today.
It is. We live in a world with new challenges.
Right.
But the echoes of the past are still there, sometimes uncomfortably so.
The world of yesterday reminds us how fragile peace is,
Yeah.
how seductive extremism can be, and how important it is to defend the values that make a truly civilized society possible.
I completely agree. Zweig's story is a cautionary tale and a reminder of our shared humanity.
Right.
It makes us think about the forces that shape our world and how our choices, big or small, can contribute to either progress or destruction.
It's a story that sticks with you.
It really does.
So for our listeners who are looking for a deep dive into history that's also relevant to today, the world of yesterday, seems like a must-read.
I think so. It gives you this unique perspective on a pivotal period in history.
Right.
And it raises these really profound questions about identity, belonging, and the human struggle for peace and understanding.
It's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive into Stefan Zweig's The World of Yesterday. We hope this exploration is giving you some new insights and a deeper understanding of this lost world and how it connects to our own time. That's it for this deep dive.
This is Alex and Eve.
We'll be back next time with another fascinating book and another thought-provoking conversation.
Until then, happy reading.
Thanks for joining us.